The words hung in the air like a blade. "They have found us." The son stared at the general, confused and desperate for clarity, but the look in his father's eyes told him enough. This was no longer about history or scars. This was about survival. Father stood his chair, scraping the floor as he moved toward the door. His body tense and ready as if years of silence had been ripped away in an instant. The son followed his steps quick and firm, refusing to be left behind. The general gave a sharp order to the guards: "Seal the building and move the families off the grounds now." The guards snapped into motion, their boots echoing as they rushed to follow the command. The messenger who had delivered the warning remained in the doorway, his face pale with fear, as if he already knew what waited beyond the walls. The father looked at him with eyes hardened by experience. "How close are they?" The messenger swallowed hard. "Too close, sir, too close." The son clenched his fists, his training rising. To the surface. He was no longer just a graduate, he was a SEAL, and this was his battlefield. He turned to the general with fire in his voice. "What do you need me to do?" The general hesitated, his gaze flicking to the father as if weighing whether to let the son step into the storm. The father shook his head. "No, he is not ready for this." The son stepped closer, his jaw locked. "I am ready, and you know it." The tension broke when the sound of distant engines roared through the walls. The general slammed his hand on the table. "No more arguments. We move now." He pointed to the father. "You know what they want. You know why they are here." The father nodded grimly, his hand brushing the scar on his arm, as if to remind himself that the past was carved into his flesh forever. He turned to his son, his voice low but steady. "Stay close no matter what happens." They moved quickly through the narrow halls, the sound of boots and shouted orders blending into a storm of urgency. Outside the once celebratory parade ground had transformed into chaos. Families were being ushered away, soldiers forming lines, weapons at the ready. The son saw the fear in the faces of those who only moments before had been cheering. It felt like two worlds colliding: celebration and war merging into a single heartbeat of dread. The father scanned the perimeter, his eyes sharp. He spotted shadows moving at the far edge of the compound, silent and deliberate. He knew those movements well, too well. "They are already inside," he muttered. The general barked orders to tighten the defenses, but the father could tell it was too late. Whoever was coming had planned this for years, not minutes. He pulled his son behind a barrier, his grip iron. "We fight from here." Gunfire erupted, shattering. The Knight family screamed as soldiers returned fire. The son felt his blood surge, adrenaline coursing as he took up a rifle from a fallen guard. His hands were steady, his training alive. He fired into the shadows and saw figures drop, but more replaced them. The enemy moved with precision. They were not here to destroy indiscriminately. They were here with a purpose, and that purpose was the man standing beside him. The general crouched behind cover, shouting into a radio for reinforcements, but the static offered no answer. The father ducked as bullets tore through the barricade, his voice harsh over the chaos. "They have cut our comms. We are on our own." The son fired again, his eyes wide as realization spread. "These men are not random. Are they? They are here for you, aren't they?" The father met his gaze, and for the first time there was no denial. "Yes, they are here for me." The words carried weight heavier than the gunfire. The son wanted to demand answers, but the battlefield left no time. He could only fight beside his father, protecting him as the truth bled into the open. The general moved toward them, sliding behind cover as rounds sparked against the walls. He shouted above the chaos, "They will not stop until they take him or kill him. You need to understand this is bigger than your graduation. This is bigger than you or me." The son gritted his teeth, his voice cutting back. Then tell me why. The father hesitated only for a moment before leaning close so only his son could hear. Because I was the one who ended Silent Dagger, not by survival, but by betrayal. I was the reason men died and the reason they hunt me now. The sun froze the world spinning, but before he could speak, a grenade landed near the barrier. The father shoved him down his body, shielding his son as the blast ripped through the air dust and fire filled the compound. Screams merging with the pounding of boots, the father coughed blood on his lips, but he pushed himself up, dragging his son to his feet. He looked into his son's eyes and said with steel in his voice, "You wanted the truth. Now fight with it." The son knotted his chest tight with fury and fear. He raised his weapon and stood shoulder to shoulder with his father as the enemy advanced, through smoke and fire. The general reloaded beside them, his face grim. "Reinforcements will not arrive in time. We hold them here, or we fall." The father tightened his grip on his rifle, his scar burning like fire. "This is the night. The past catches." "Me," he said. The son looked at him with defiance. "No, this is the night we break it." The enemy surged closer, their shapes clearer in the smoke. The son aimed steady, his finger on the trigger, his mind clear for the first time. He had wanted answers, and he had them. And now he had something more, a reason to fight. The father raised his rifle, too, the scar on his arm glowing under the firelight as if alive. The two of them stood together, a shadow of betrayal, and the flame of new blood ready to face whatever storm was breaking through the gates. The father froze his rifle, lowering slightly, his eyes locked on the figure emerging from the smoke. The man walked with calm steps, as if the battlefield belonged to him, his presence commanding silence. Even over the crack of rifles and the roar of fire, the son looked between his father and the stranger, trying to read the unspoken recognition etched in his father's face. "Who is that?" The father whispered the name again, softer this time. "Marcus." The son waited, but his father said no more, his gaze locked on the ghost from his past. Marcus stopped a few paces away, his soldiers forming a line behind him, their weapons trained on the defenders, yet he did not fire. His eyes found the scar on the father's arm, and a cruel smile spread across his face. "I told you one day I would return, and when I did, you would pay." The son tightened his grip on his rifle, but the father raised a hand to stop him. His voice was sharp, but steady. "Not yet. You don't know what you are facing." The battlefield seemed to freeze soldiers, hesitating, caught between commands and confusion. Marcus spoke again, his voice cutting through the smoke like a blade. "Silent Dagger was not your victory. It was your betrayal. You left us behind, and now I carry the weight of those you abandoned. Every man I lost, every friend who bled out in that desert, they march with me tonight." The son felt the words like a knife twisting in his chest. He turned to his father, demanding, "Truth. Tell me it isn't real. Tell me you did not." The father could not speak, only the scar told the truth, etched into his skin, burning with memory. The son felt the ground beneath him shift, his image of his father cracking yet even through the storm. He saw the man still standing between him and the enemy. Whatever he had done, he was still protecting him. Marcus lifted a hand, and his men stepped closer, rifles raised. Their mission was clear. This was not about conquering. This was about finishing. A vendetta gunfire erupted again, shattering the pause. The defenders scrambled, firing into the advancing line. The son shot with precision, his training guiding him. Though his heart was torn in two, he saw Marcus standing untouched, his eyes fixed on the father. The father fought with ferocity, every shot a refusal to be taken. But Marcus' men pushed closer, relentless waves fueled by vengeance. The general shouted orders, rallying the defenders, but their numbers were thinning and hope was running low amid the chaos. Marcus raised his voice, his words carrying across the battlefield. I do not want your son. I do not want your general. I want only you. Step forward and end this, or watch everyone else fall. The father steadied his breath, his decision already forming. He turned to his son, his voice low. This fight is mine, not yours. I must finish what I began. The son shook his head, his eyes burning with fury. No, you cannot leave me to fight your ghosts alone. We do this together or not at all. Father gripped his son's shoulder, pride and sorrow mixing in his eyes. You have his strength, he whispered, but you must not inherit his curse. The son shook free, lifting his rifle toward Marcus. You call it a curse, I call it my duty, and I will not let you bear it alone. Marcus saw the defiance and laughed a deep, hollow laugh, like father like son doomed to bleed for shadows. He raised his hand to signal the final assault, but a single crack of a rifle silenced the moment. The father seized the moment, charging forward his rifle, spitting fire, the son at his side covering his flank. They moved as one, shadows in smoke, carving a path through Marcus' men. Marcus watched them advance, his eyes narrowing. He dropped his ruined rifle and drew a blade massive and gleaming in the firelight. He wanted no guns. He wanted blood. The father saw the blade and knew this was how it would end, not with bullets but with the weight of old betrayal. The two men clashed in the center of the stow. The air around them seemed to tighten, as if the crowd itself had vanished, leaving only the father, the son, and the general standing in the shadow of truth. The father straightened his shoulders, and for the first time in years his eyes met the general's. Without wavering, the noise of families embracing blurred into nothingness, and only the weight of memory remained pressing against them both. The scar burned beneath the sleeve like a brand that could not be hidden, no matter how long he tried. The son looked between them, his chest still rising and falling from the pride of graduation. But now that pride was tangled with confusion. He had never seen his father stand so rigid, so silent, as though a storm raged within him. His father had told him stories of service, but never of scars, never of the things that linger long after uniforms are hung away. He stepped closer, his voice quiet, barely carrying above the clamor around them. Dad, what is happening? The father opened his mouth, but no words came. Instead, the general cut through the silence, his tone sharp as a blade. He said, that scar is not just a wound. It is a mark of the mission that should never have been survived. The words sliced through the air and the son froze, searching his father's face for answers, but his father said nothing. His silence was heavier than any denial could have been. The general took one more step closer, his eyes hard with recognition. I was there, he said. I saw what happened. I saw the fire. I saw the betrayal. And I saw you walk away when no one else could. The son felt the ground tilt beneath him. His father, a man he had always seen as quiet and steady, had suddenly become a figure of mystery and shadows. The stories he thought he knew no longer matched the man standing before him. The father finally spoke, his voice low but steady. That was a lifetime ago, General. A different war, a different man. You should let it stay buried. But the general shook his head. You know as well as I do that the past never stays buried. Not when men still carry scars like yours, and not when others still wonder how you walked out alive. The son grabbed his father's arm, his hand resting just above the scar. He felt the raised skin beneath the fabric and shivered. He remembered being a child and asking about it. His father had only said it was nothing important. But now, standing here watching the general confront him, he realized it was everything. His heart pounded as he whispered, "Tell me the truth. Dad, please." The father looked at him, and for a moment his eyes softened, but then he glanced at the general and the softness vanished, replaced by steel. "The truth is not for today," he said. "The truth carries weight heavier than you know, and you are not ready to hold it?" But his son shook his head, his jaw set. "I am a seal now. I am ready for anything." The father closed his eyes briefly, as if in pain before he opened them again. The general crossed his arms, his gaze still fixed. "You cannot protect him forever," he said. "He deserves to know what you did and why you did it. He deserves to know the price others paid so that scar could exist." The father's jaw tightened, his silence louder than any words. The son stared at him, desperate for answers. But none came, only the weight of secrets pressing down on both of them. Around them the crowd began to thin as families left the grounds, but still the three stood locked in a triangle of silence. The officers nearby sensed the tension, but none dared intervene. They knew the general well enough to recognize that whatever was happening was not for their ears. The son stepped back slightly, his mind racing with fragments of questions and half-remembered stories, wondering how much of his life had been built on shadows and silence. The general finally spoke again, but his voice was quieter, almost a whisper, meant only for the father and the son. "You think the scar is yours alone?" he said. "But it is not. It belongs to every man who fell that day. It belongs to the ghosts who never left the battlefield." The father flinched slightly, his face betraying the memories he had buried for so long, and in that instant, the son saw the weight his father carried. The son felt his stomach twist. He looked at his father and said, "If you will not tell me, then I will find out myself. I cannot stand here wearing this trident, not knowing the truth about who you are and what you left behind." The father's eyes darkened, but he did not stop him. He simply nodded, as though he had known this moment would come one day. The general gave a final nod, his face unreadable. He turned away, leaving father and son standing in silence. But before he stepped into the shadows of the departing crowd, he looked back and said, "He will find the truth, and when he does, you will have to face it again." The father watched him disappear into the sea of people. His son stood beside him, breathing hard, the questions burning brighter than ever. The father knew the time for silence was ending, but the words still clung to his throat, refusing to break free. He turned to his son, his eyes heavy with regret. But before he could speak, a voice from behind them called out sharply, "Sir, you need to come with us right now." The father froze, knowing that the past was no longer just whispering but roaring back to life. The voice that called out carried the weight of command, and it silenced even the celebration that still lingered on the edges of the parade ground. Two uniformed men stepped forward, their movements crisp and direct, their eyes fixed on the father. They were not part of the cheering families nor the proud officers. They were men who carried orders, not smiles. The son instinctively moved closer to his father, but the older man raised a steady hand, signaling him to hold his ground. The father turned slowly to face the two men, his expression unreadable. He had known they would come. He had known since the moment the general recognized him that his time had run out. The scar on his arm seemed to pulse hotter than ever, as if mocking his attempt to bury the past. He straightened his back, his eyes cold as he asked quietly, "Where are we going?" The two men exchanged a glance before one of them answered. "The general requests your presence immediately." The father stepped in first, his son close behind. The room was bare save for a table and 3 chairs. A folder sat on the table, its edges frayed from years of being opened and closed. The general took a seat, his eyes never leaving the father. "Sit," he commanded. The father lowered himself into the chair opposite him, while the son remained standing, his fists clenched. The general tapped the folder slowly, as if weighing its contents, before he spoke. "This file contains what "Remains of Operation Silent Dagger," he said. His voice was calm but heavy. Every name, every detail, every scar, and every ghost. The son froze the words, cutting into him. He had never heard of such an operation. The father sat still, his face hard, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of pain. The general opened the folder and pulled out a photograph, sliding it across the table toward the son. The young man looked down, and his breath caught. The photo showed a group of soldiers standing together in a desolate place, their faces covered in grit and exhaustion. But one face was unmistakable. It was his father, younger, sharper, yet scarred already by the burden of war. The son reached for the photo, but his hands trembled. He looked up at his father, demanding answers, but the older man said nothing, only staring at the picture as though it were a mirror reflecting the ghosts he could never escape. The general spoke again. "That scar on your father's arm was not the result of chance. It was the mark of betrayal. The mission was compromised. Men were lost, and your father carried out something that few would believe possible. He lived, but the price was steep, and the silence he carries is heavier than the wound itself." The son's chest tightened, his heart hammering as he tried to understand. He turned to his father, his voice sharp. "Tell me what happened." The father closed his eyes for a moment before opening them again. He spoke slowly, each word pulled like stone from a riverbed. That mission was never meant to succeed. We were sent to die. Only a handful of us knew the truth, and I was the one who walked away because someone had to bear the weight of it. The son shook his head, struggling to accept the words. The general leaned forward, his eyes locked on the scar. He walked away, yes, but not without leaving a trail that has followed him to this very day. The room grew colder, the silence heavy enough to crush. The son felt anger, confusion, and fear twist inside him. He looked at the scar again and realized it was not just a mark of survival, but a symbol of everything his father had refused to tell him. He whispered, "Why did you never tell me?" His father met his gaze, his eyes wee. The day of the Navy SEAL graduation had drawn a crowd that stretched beyond the parade ground and into the wide open field as families, friends, and high-ranking officers filled the seats under the warm sun. Flags fluttered gently in the breeze, while the recruits stood in their freshly pressed uniforms, their faces holding the weight of months of brutal training. The brass band played low in the background as the anticipation of the ceremony built to a quiet hum. Everyone knew this was no ordinary graduation, for the men and women who stood in formation were about to be marked as warriors, ready for anything. Among the crowd stood a man who did not belong in the neat rows of pressed suits and polished medals. He was older, with gray at his temples and deep lines across his face. His posture was strong but carried a heaviness in his shoulders that drew the eye of anyone who looked his way. He kept his hands tucked deep into the pockets of his worn jacket as though he had something to hide. Beside him sat his son, one of the graduating SEAL candidates. The pride in the young man's eyes was clear, but there was also a shadow there, a quiet question that only the father could answer. The general overseeing the ceremony strode across the platform, his chest lined with ribbons, his steps measured and commanding. His gaze swept across the rows of recruits, then drifted toward the crowd. For a moment, his eyes locked on the older man and did not move. The general narrowed his gaze, as if something about the man's presence scratched at a memory long buried. He nodded politely, but his attention did not fade from him. The band played louder. The announcer called the names of the first graduates, yet the general's focus remained fixed. The father shifted in his seat, his hand pulling unconsciously from his pocket and resting on his knee. The sunlight fell across the skin of his wrist, and in that moment, a pale scar was revealed. Jagged, uneven, it ran across the top of his forearm, like a brand etched deep into flesh. The man quickly tucked his hand back into his pocket, but it was too late. The general's eyes had caught it, and for a moment his jaw clenched, and his breath grew shallow. He recognized that mark he had seen it. Before, in a place far from this parade ground, the son straightened proudly as his name was called, but he noticed the general's gaze lingering on his father. Confusion flickered across his face. He had always known his father carried stories from a past he never spoke of, scars that ran deeper than the flesh, but never had he seen another man look at him with such a mixture of recognition and unease. The general leaned forward ever so slightly, whispering something to the officer at his side. The officer nodded and scribbled a note, quickly passing it down the line. The father felt the weight of the general's stare pressing against him like a burden he could not escape. He shifted again, his mind replaying the memories he had fought so long to bury. He had sworn never to let them resurface, never to let his son carry the weight of what had happened all those years ago. He glanced at the stage, then at his son, then back at the general, who now stood still as stone watching him, like a hawk waiting for the right moment. The crowd erupted in applause as another graduate received his trident pin, but the father heard none of it. His ears were filled only with the echoes of a past battlefield and the sound of the general's voice. From a time long ago, the scar burned beneath his sleeve as though alive, demanding to be seen. The general had not forgotten, and neither had the scar. The father felt the air grow heavy, the weight of secrets pressing down on him. Secrets that, if revealed, would change everything. His son thought he knew. The applause died down, and silence spread once again as the next names were called. The father kept his eyes lowered, but his pulse quickened. He knew the moment would come when the general would confront him, when the past would be dragged into the open. He had come here today to watch his son take the oath to step into the future as a SEAL. But now it seemed his own history would not let him go. The son sensed it too. The tension, the unspoken weight between his father and the general, and though he could not yet understand it, he knew something was about to break. The general stepped closer to the edge of the platform, his hand tightening around the railing as he stared down at the older man. His voice was calm when he spoke, but there was steel beneath it. His words cut through the air like a blade, though only the father seemed to hear them. The general said, "I know who you are." The father looked up, meeting his gaze. The crowd cheered for another graduate, but their voices faded into nothing. The scar burned brighter than ever, as if demanding to be recognized. The father did not move. He did not speak. He knew this was only the beginning of something he had spent years trying to outrun. The announcer called more names, but the sound was dull as though wrapped in cotton. The son returned to his place in formation, his chest tight, his mind racing. He had seen the way the general looked at his father, and he had seen the way his father could not meet his gaze. Questions piled in his mind, demanding answers, but answers never came. He stood tall as a SEAL was expected, but inside he felt a tremor of unease that no training could still. He knew that after today his father would have to speak. The general leaned down, whispering once more to the officer at his side. The note was passed again, and this time the officer stepped from the platform, moving through the crowd with sharp precision. His eyes scanned the rows until they settled on the father. The officer walked closer, his boots striking the ground with a rhythm that felt louder than the band, and when he reached the row, he paused, his gaze unblinking, as he said quietly, "Sir, the general requests a word with you after the ceremony." The father did not answer. He gave the faintest nod, but inside he felt the walls closing in. He had always known this day might come, the day when the truth would no longer stay buried, but he had not expected it to. Be here, not in front of his son, not at the very moment his boy stepped into manhood as a warrior of his own. The timing felt cruel, but fate cared little for timing, and the scar had always carried its own destiny. The officer stepped back, leaving, the father in silence. The crowd rose again in applause as the final names were called. The son raised his hand in salute, but his thoughts were elsewhere. His eyes burned into his father's face, seeking meaning in his stillness. And when he saw the faintest tremor in his father's hand, he knew without doubt that the general had seen something that tied them together. Something that his father had never told him. Something that explained the nights of silence and the shadows that sometimes haunted his eyes. The general returned to the center of the platform, his voice booming as he declared the recruits to be SEALs. The crowd erupted, the band thundered, and the sky filled with the cries of families cheering. Yet beneath the roar of celebration, there was a quiet unease that only a few could feel. The father rose slowly, clapping with the others, but his eyes remained fixed on the general, who never looked away. His son smiled for the crowd, but his smile did not reach his eyes for the questions. Inside him grew heavier with every passing moment. The ceremony ended, but the story was not finished. The crowd began to move, families rushing to their loved ones, hugs and tears filling the air. The father stood still, waiting because he knew he could not leave. The general was already stepping down from the platform, his gaze locked on him, his strides purposeful. The son moved toward him, ready to embrace the man who had.